Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone. We are here again. So let's crack on. So quick recap as always. Can I just have one or two people just give me a quick recap, or what do we remember from yesterday? Whatever you remember.
Well, I remember we looked at the benefits of Agile. And you gave us a list of the benefits. It's enjoyable. It's it's fun, quality-wise, right? Produce, increase productivity. A whole load of benefits derivable from it.
Good.
I also remember that we looked at the differences between the traditional form of the traditional methodology, that's a waterfall, and we did a comparison of it with Agile. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anybody else wants to go? Just a few points that you remember from yesterday.
Yes, we went through the process of choosing and agreeing on a team name, and then the importance and things to look out for, when you're having meetings within the team.
Such as, give us a couple of examples of what to look out for.
Such as making sure everyone participates, make contributions, and respect each other's opinions, and at the end of the day, learn to agree, voting to agree and all that stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you. So let's crack on with what we have to do today. So what I have here is a slightly more differentiation between the traditional and Scrum, and then looking at the particular parameters when we're working with Scrum and when we're working with the traditional project management. And it's just like a recap for us, really. So the first emphasis here is, it says emphasis on people, whereas traditional is processes. Documentation, minimal in Scrum or Agile, comprehensive in traditional. Now, let's talk about that for a bit. A lot of people have this misconception that when you are in an Agile environment, there's no documentation. That is not true. We just document, we don't put a lot of emphasis on documentation. And documentation is not as heavy in an Agile environment. Whereas in the traditional environment, there's so much emphasis on the different reports and management products in terms of documentation. And rightfully, Scrum is iterative, traditional is linear. Upfront planning, low in Scrum, high in traditional. Prioritization, based on business value for Agile or Scrum, fixed in traditional. Quality assurance, we are very customer-centric in Agile because we are always involving the customer, whereas we are process-centric in the traditional. If you remember, I showed you the Gantt chart at the beginning and how the project manager is always trying to follow the plan. Self-organizing team in Agile, we have teams that are managed in the traditional environment. You have a project manager that is managing the team. But in Agile, we have a Scrum Master that is facilitating the team. Management style is quite decentralized in Agile. It is centralized in traditional. Change is, we're constantly capturing changes in Agile, whereas we have to go through a formal change process in the traditional. Leadership is quite collaborative. As a Scrum Master, you're a servant leader, whereas leadership in the traditional is command and control. And then, of course, it is business value driven, whereas it is process driven in the traditional. So that is just like a recap for us. Now, when we talk about traditional project management, as you can see here, we have like a hierarchy. If you look at the traditional, it's like we have a hierarchy. The project manager or the team lead, if you like, is at the top, followed by the team members. Compare that to the Agile teams. We don't have a leader. What we have is a facilitator, the servant leader, who is usually the Scrum Master, okay? And if you look at the way this diagram, or if you look at what this diagram is representing, it is that we are all the same. There's no hierarchy here. We are all the same. Even though I'm the Scrum Master, we are all the same. We are equals here, because we are not trying to promote status difference in this kind of environment. Oh, I'm the boss, I'm the leader, I'm the project manager. We're trying to do away with status difference, because what that does is it brings barriers, okay? So this configuration tells a lot of story. So what is Scrum? Now, I'm sure some of you are familiar with the rugby game. That is where it comes from.
We lost you.
Hello, can you hear me now? Are we familiar with the rugby game? Okay.
Not really. This is
okay.
US.
The rugby game, I mean, I'm not a great football or anything fan, but the rugby game is slightly different from football, where everybody from one side of the field is trying to move and go and score and win together. That's what they do, isn't it? I think it's similar to American baseball, Daily. I believe it's similar.
It's
so
similar,
they are, yes, it's similar. So they are trying to move together from one end and to go and win together at the other end of the pitch, if you like. That's where the whole idea of Scrum came from, to say that we're going to work together to achieve something at the end of the 2 weeks, instead of working separately and working in the waterfall way. So Scrum is a framework that is used in a complex and uncertain dynamic environment for speedy delivery of quality products and services iteratively. So what we're saying here is that the environment is complex, it is uncertain. Can we stay muted, please? The environment is complex and it is uncertain. So which means we're not quite sure, of the different requirements that we are going to be working with, because things change very quickly in this environment. And I remember using the example of building a house. I'm a woman with 4 children. If I call an architect and say I need a 5-bedroom house, it's very unlikely that my requirements will change. So that is a much more stable environment, okay? I want a 4-bedroom house, you build me a 4-bedroom house, it's very unlikely my requirement will change. But if we're talking about digital products, imagine all the projects that were going on just before COVID-19. Imagine how quickly things would have had to change for those projects. Digital projects, digital products, okay? When it comes to digital products, it's quite complex and the environment is quite dynamic. So 1 minute, the customer wants A, the next minute, the environment is saying B, and we need to pivot in order to satisfy the customer. Now, Scrum as a framework is lighter compared to the traditional framework or methodology like Prince2 or PMP. It is simple to understand, and you'll come to see when I share the framework with you, you'll come to see that indeed it is simple to understand. But when it comes to applying it, that is where the complications can be. That's where it is difficult, because it is people driven, okay? So simple framework, easy to understand, but not always easy to implement. Now, a typical project, your waterfall project, you have your requirements, you have your design phase, development, testing, deployment, and your review phase, where you are sharing your deliverables, reviewing your deliverables or demoing to the stakeholders. So you have all of this. You have it also when you're doing Scrum, when you're doing Agile. You have to gather requirements. You have to do the design. You do exactly the same thing. But what is different is that unlike the traditional where you finish the planning, so this requirement phase, the feasibility, you would have done all of that. And then the requirements, you do your planning, and you do all your planning upfront. You do all your planning, and then you baseline your planning. After baselining that plan, then it means that Before you can make any change to that plan, you have to go through a formal change control process. In the Agile environment, Scrum, to be specific now, you do all of these things, but you do just enough. So we're not going to do all the plans. We will do just enough plan based on our high-level roadmap. Bearing in mind you have a high-level roadmap, you have an idea of what you want to deliver, we'll do just the initial small planning and get to work, start coding. When we finish that sprint, we deliver and we get our feedback. Then we go to the backlog again. Do just enough planning and give the incremental deliverable. You remember we used the picture of the scooter yesterday. So we keep increasing the deliverable. The scooter might look like, you know what, these are different products, but that was just to explain the whole idea of iteration and incremental. So just enough planning, just enough design, just enough development, review. You start the cycle again. Enough planning, enough design, develop, test, review. You keep doing that cycle until you deliver all the increments. You keep going and going. One sprint finishes, the next one starts. Here I'm saying cross-functional team. Cross-functional team meaning we must have all the skills that we need in that agile team of 9 or I think 9 people maximum, sometimes 10. We must have all the skills we need in that team in order to deliver that product. And then sometimes, because you are a new team, you are not truly cross-functional. Because you are a new team, you are not truly, you are cross-functional, but you are not truly cross-functional. Bear with me, please. I just needed to get them to be quiet. Sorry about that. So we have a cross-functional team, but they are not truly cross-functional because it's like we are doing a mini waterfall. So in the team, we have the business analyst. The business analyst will do only business analysis work. In the beginning, I need you to take note of this. In the beginning, you'll find that you are doing what we call a mini waterfall. So don't be surprised when you go out there and you see the Agile team and you're thinking, hold on a minute, this looks like waterfall. It is because it's a new team. They've just come together. They are still trying to work towards being truly cross-functional. And this is where the T profile comes in. This is where the market of skills come in. You remember we did the market of skills? This is where your market of skills now becomes important. Why? Because we want to work towards having a cross-functional team. We start to shadow each other. There might even be need for some of us to go for external training outside the organization. There might be need for that. It also may well be that we are able to teach ourselves and get to that T profile. But do not be surprised if the need is so high that people have to take time out to go and actually skill up. Okay? So this is where your market of skills comes in. I'm a business analyst. For now, that is all I am in this team. But if I continue to be just a business analyst, then we will never get to that point where we have a truly cross-functional team. There's somebody else who is a tester. If all that person is going to do in this Agile team is testing, then we will be doing mini waterfall. That's what we're going to be doing for the next 1 year or 2 years or whatever the case may be. So in order for us to move away, we must start aiming for the T profile. And that T profile means that we have our specialist area, and then we have skills in something else. So imagine I'm a tester, but I can also do a little bit of business analysis, and I can also do a little bit of development. So what is the benefit of this? If I'm the tester and the business analyst is not around, it's not a showstopper. We can still have our meetings. We can still work on user stories. We can still define user stories because other people in the team understand business analysis. I hope that is making sense. I hope I'm not just blabbing on. Is that making sense so far?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It's clear. Yeah.
It's getting so the market of skills. This is why we needed the market of skills. This is why we needed the market of skills to say, okay, who knows what in this team? Oh, I can do this. You can do that. Okay, business analysis is what I'm going to be doing most of the time, but I can also learn how to test. Okay, so let's move on. So mini waterfall, do not be surprised at all if you encounter that as a Scrum Master. And then the sprint goes on and on and on for each iteration. And this is just to further drive the whole point of iteration and incremental home. If you can see, this is the Mona Lisa. So if you look at the top picture there, you can see that was quite iterative and, kept going back to get feedback, do a little bit more, go back, get feedback. And if you think about it, like, let's consider somebody is writing your biography and it's going to be like 12 chapters. It will be much more difficult for me to come to you after writing the whole 12 chapters. It's better for me to write the first chapter, come to you, we review it together, and then I make some changes. And then when you are happy with the first chapter, we move on to the second chapter. Iterative and incremental. So by the next time we meet again, we start the second chapter, it means we are moving on in increments. So this is just an example. So if you look at this now, we have iterative, we have incremental. So when you deliver your software, what you deliver makes sense. It's functional. Okay? This might be a picture that is not really pleasing to the eye, but it gets better as we go on. But when we're talking about coding, that little bit of code that you release is useful. It is useful. It is functional. It does something for the end user. It does something for the customer. Okay? So Scrum is great for complex product development. It consists of the Scrum team, the associated roles, the events and the artifacts and the rules. We'll come to see them shortly. It is not a development technique. Don't get it confused with development techniques. It is not. It is a framework. And then within this framework called Scrum, you may now use a development technique like C++, Python, Java, pair programming or whatever the case may be. But Scrum itself is just a framework to help you deliver those products, okay? And of course, Scrum as a framework, see it as a container, okay? That helps you deliver that product. And we are now talking about moving from project to product. In the waterfall, we were project-oriented. Project-oriented. We put a team together for the purpose of delivering a project. And when the project ends, we disband the team. In an agile environment, we don't disband the team. We want to keep the team for as long as possible. Why do you think that is a good thing? We want to keep the team for as long as possible, as opposed to the traditional environment where we disband the team. What's the benefit of that? Anyone? Anyone?
Sorry, can you repeat that? You said what's the advantage of?
In a traditional project environment, at the end of the project, we bring people together. We create a team to deliver a project. And at the end of that project, we disband. We let go of the team. Take, for example, you're within an organization. We want to run a project. We'll take people from different departments. We'll take Ade from this team. We take Tunde from that team. We take Mobola from that team. We bring everybody together in order for us to execute on this project. And so it's a temporary team. So the moment that project is delivered, everybody goes back to their original team. That's what used to happen. Everybody goes back to their original team. But now we are saying, when we put this team together, this agile team of 9 people, they must be stable and continuous team. And this is because we are moving away from project mindset to product mindset. So my question now is, what's the benefit of keeping the team stable and long-term?
Well, you already know how you work with each other. Mm-hmm. And you might just want to keep that because, I mean, you work with each other and you understand each other better.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of looking for new people that can interact together.
Fantastic. There's more. What else? That's a very good answer, Dele. Thank you very much.
And then there's the market of skills, that advantage of knowing what your strengths are, what each person can do, and you carry it on to different projects. So
different projects.
Yes.
Or shall we say different, shall we say you can then, different products. You can then
different products.
Exactly, exactly. So okay.
I think you just don't change a winning team.
Okay, you just don't change a winning team. I like that. So you have become a winning team, the Phoenix team. Okay.
And then it makes it easier for people because they've known each other. They can work together. They can be more creative and a lot more self-organizing. So they bring ideas. They're free with each other. They can bring ideas on board to say, okay, because there's that level of interaction. They can be a lot more creative within that team that they are in. And they can also be innovative. You know, like, okay, this is a new team and we've been working together and we are going to carry on rather than you are disbanding the team. So the morale within the team is very high. And because having worked as a Scrum team, they have like known each other and become self-organizing. So
fantastic. There's more.
Yeah.
What else?
And then you probably would always have to start with the waterfall each time. That's the waterfall technique. That you will plan, but it wouldn't take as long because kind of riding off the back of the first point I made about knowing a lot more about each other and each other's strengths, what each person is able to do. So you tend to move a little quicker than if you disband and start afresh with totally different people. Learning. I guess.
I was also looking for overhead. The overhead of starting a new team is not there. Okay, the overhead of starting a new team is not there, and you've said it all. They know each other very well. It has probably become a safe environment. It takes time. Team formation. That's why I said overhead. So I was looking for somebody to say, the whole. Well, you sort of said it. You know the Tuckman model. Forming, storming, norming, performing, like you said, they've gone through that phase. Although teams may go back and forth a little bit between storming and performing sometimes, but that overhead of trying to put a team together is no longer there, which is part of what you do with the waterfall. Every time you're bringing a new team together to try and get them to know each other before they can start working on the project. So now we're talking about the product mindset, not project mindset. So this team is a stable team. However, I think it was Tunde that said you don't want to disband a winning team. But guess what? People will leave. In as much as you want people to remain together for as long as possible, people could leave for whatever reason. Somebody is going on maternity leave. Somebody is moving to another state or whatever the case may be. Somebody has just been promoted or whatever. When that happens, what you will find is that productivity will come down a little bit. Why? Why will productivity decrease? Somebody has left the team. Somebody, someone new has joined. It affects your productivity. Why?
So it takes time to bring the time it takes to bring the other person on board. The existing team members already have they know each other, their morale or whatever.
Exactly.
And then the newcomer might just feel a little bit an outsider and it takes time for them. And it all becomes part of this overhead thing you've just mentioned.
Exactly. And then it affects our productivity. Okay. Now, as a Scrum Master that is looking at maybe your burn down chart, you may find that when your burn down chart goes down, when your velocity goes down, it is because somebody has just left and somebody new has joined. And that overhead of trying to get this person up to speed is what you are seeing on your burn down chart, on your graph. That is what you're seeing. But we'll come to that later. So this Stacy model is just talking about the complexity of using Agile in a complex environment. So the less certainty you have and the less agreement you have in terms of your requirements makes it more of a waterfall. Whereas the further away you are from certainty and agreement means that you need more of an agile kind of framework in order for you to develop your product. So this is just what the Stacy complexity model is communicating, just in case it comes up in a conversation for you. It doesn't, you are not lost. All this is saying is when it's complex, we're using agile. The more we add to simplicity and complicated, maybe we just need waterfall. So this is what your typical agile framework looks like at a glance. Let me show you the simple one first, and then I'll come back to this. Now, if you look at this diagram here, this is agile, this is Scrum. This is the Scrum framework. We have a backlog. Our backlog here is where we have our requirements. We then go into what we call a sprint planning event. During this sprint planning, we're trying to decide what to work on for the next 2 weeks. Remember, we're doing a 2-week sprint. When we decide what we're going to work on, obviously the product owner is the one that's going to decide that. We then take them into our own sprint backlog. This sprint backlog is called an artifact. This sprint backlog belongs to the team. This product backlog belongs to the product owner, okay? We're all working from it, but it's the product owner that updates it. Let's just say the product owner owns it, okay? But the sprint backlog belongs to the team. Then we go into our 2-week sprint. And during this 2-week sprint, we do what we call a daily stand-up. During our 2-week sprint, we do what we call a daily stand-up. That daily stand-up is like a quick, brief progress meeting, 15 minutes, so that before we kick off every morning, we sort of have an idea of what Dele is doing, what Tunde is doing, what Franca is doing. We know if somebody needs help. We know if there's an impediment, who is removing that impediment. If we have if we have a dependency with finance or compliance, we know, and we know who is dealing with that. Or maybe we are expecting some information because we have a blocker. We know that we're going to get that information today, and because of that, we can get on with something. So every day during this 2 weeks period, we are meeting first thing in the morning, maybe 9 o'clock, maybe 9:30. Again, as a team, we will agree. It is not imposed, it is agreed, and then we carry each other along. Then at the end of the 2 weeks, you have what we call a sprint review. During this sprint review, the stakeholders come to a meeting. The people who have interest in what you have developed, they come to the meeting, and the development team will then do a demo to the stakeholders. The development team will do a demo of their increment to the stakeholders. Once that is done, they then go and hold what we call a sprint retrospective. The print here is quite small, but that is a sprint retrospective. Now, sprint retrospective means that we are having a meeting for maybe 1 hour, 1 hour, 30 minutes to look back in the last 2 weeks during this sprint. How well did we perform in terms of our deliverables and the quality of our interactions? We deliver the product at the end of the 2 weeks. So usually, let us assume the review and the retrospective is on a Friday of the week that the sprint ended. So maybe the review could be like maybe 10:30 in the morning. Then maybe people will go for lunch, because you don't want to have one meeting immediately after the other. Always have a break. So they do the review, and then maybe an hour later or 2 hours later, they do the retrospective. So during the retrospective, we are looking at how well we worked, both in terms of the quality of our product, in other words, the quality of our deliverables, and the quality of our interactions. Once that is done, we may then have some action items. In other words, maybe we will say some of the things that will come out will be, we didn't have all the tools we needed for this sprint. Our JIRA license has expired. Our JIRA license expired, but somehow somebody forgot to renew it. Whoever was responsible for that forgot to renew it. Whatever the case may be, it can be any impediment. It can be any at all. So whatever those issues are, if you remember, we write on Post-it notes. We were using our collaborative tool yesterday. So during your retrospective, we're going to be using the Jamboard tool, something like that, to communicate our concerns. So just like yesterday, we were giving name, trying to name our team. During this meeting, as a Scrum Master, you are making sure everybody is speaking up. So Deji is saying, oh, we could have done better if we had the Jira. Somebody else is saying the dependency we had with compliance, that it was not resolved to their satisfaction, or that the answers you were looking for came late. Whatever your concerns are, we put it on the Post-it note. Everybody is writing, and we put it on the board. Okay, we put it on the Post-it note and on the board. In this case, we are going to be doing it digitally. And then we look at the quality of our interactions. Did we work well together? When Dele needed help, did she get help? When somebody else needed something, was it available from the other team member? Just like that. Was communication good? Were we able to communicate? Did we get help on time? When somebody had a bottleneck, when somebody was struggling and it was obvious that their work was piling, did anybody ask? Did anybody come to that person's aid? The quality of our interaction. How well are we collaborating? We are also looking at that, not just the hard problems that we had. So once that is done, we need to then ask ourselves, how do we then solve this problem? How do we go forward? So you must never have actions that has no owner. So based on what was communicated, who is going to resolve this? Who is going to talk to compliance so that the problems don't repeat themselves? Maybe you need compliance to assign somebody so that every time you need, questions asked in compliance, it's not just a case of it's in their email, nobody is answering, or whatever the case may be. So who is going to take that action in our Scrum team to make sure that the issue we had with compliance in this sprint doesn't happen in the next sprint? So as you can see, we are working in short cycles and we are dealing with issues as we go along, whether it is soft skills issue, whether it is our competencies issue, whether it is organizational issue like having a dependency, or whatever blockers we may be having. Maybe it's risk. We are dealing with it, but we are dealing with it in short iterations, and we are taking actions faster. Okay? So once that is done, this is a Friday, for example. Monday morning, the cycle starts again for another 2 weeks. We come back Monday morning, we have our sprint planning meeting. We go through the exact same process again. We have our sprint planning meeting with the product owner. Everybody is there. Everybody is at this meeting, because this is the meeting where the product owner is telling us what he wants for the next sprint. The sprint we're about to start now. The product owner is telling us what his goals are, because the product owner is the voice of the customer. The product owner represents the customer. So let me go back to the other fuller picture. So if we take a good look at this picture, we have the inputs. Obviously, the product owner is not just acting on his own. He's responding to the needs of customers, users, some stakeholders, executives who are responsible for return on investment. And based on the stakeholder engagement and communication that is going on between the product owner, these requirements then come into what we call the product backlog. The requirements come, somebody's typing something. The requirements come into the product backlog via the product owner. So which means the product owner is responsible for the delivery of value, because the product owner is the voice of the customer. So once the product owner knows what is required here, it comes into the backlog. Now, during this meeting here, let me get my pencil. During this meeting here, can't find it. During this meeting here, it doesn't mean it's the product owner alone that attends that meeting from the Scrum team. No, the Scrum Master can be at this meeting. all the development team, everybody in the team can be at this meeting. Why is it important that they are at this meeting too? Why is it important that the development team, everybody is at this meeting? What's the benefit?
Yeah, we saw a similar example yesterday about where the whole thing, what the actual product owner wanted. Right from the design, it was totally misinterpreted and misrepresented right through the process. At the end, we ended up getting the wrong product. So obviously, it's very necessary that the product owner is there and everybody else, or product development officers.
Great answer. The developers are going to develop this. The business analyst really needs to understand the users, you know, in terms of their needs. Everybody needs to understand what they need. If I'm going to develop it, as you're talking about your requirements in English language, if I'm a developer, I'm already, you know, translating what you are saying into my coding language. And because I'm translating in my coding language, it gives me the opportunity to say, that is not going to be easy to code. Is this what you really mean? I have that opportunity in real time because I'm part of the conversation to question because I'm already interpreting into my coding language. If I'm a tester, again, I'm also saying, how do we want to test that? That is going to be difficult to test. And based on my contribution, the conversation might now take another dimension. Do you see? The conversation takes another dimension simply based on my presence there as a tester or my presence there as a developer or a user experience and user interface person. Because how the interface of this digital product will look matters. So I have a contribution to make there. Imagine a situation where we were not invited to this meeting. Halfway down the sprint, we are then asking questions. Is this what exactly did they mean? Oh, I thought that was what they meant. We're asking questions. We're ping-ponging. We are calling the stakeholders to say, I was reading this requirement, but it's not very clear to me. You've already started the sprint. Whereas if everybody had been at that initial, requirements gathering meeting, and I like the fact that you remembered the picture we used yesterday about how everybody just had a different meaning about what needed to be delivered, to be produced. So that's why we all need to be there. And at this point, we are not necessarily talking in too much detail. Right here at the top, we are not necessarily talking in too much detail just yet. We're not. We are talking high level. And at this point, we have, bear with me. At this point, we have a roadmap. The outcome of this conversation will be a high-level roadmap of all the possible things we may have to code. And I use the word all the possible things we may have to deliver because things change. That's why I said may have to deliver. But at least we have an idea already of the things we want to deliver. And we're going to start working with the first few important items, epics, that needs to be delivered to the customer because that is what adds the most value right now to the customer. So we have our high-level roadmap. So you're going to do all this practically. So based on that high-level roadmap, let us assume we're developing a website, and let us assume we have an epic called login. Okay. Now, if we say login, it sounds so simple, but there's so much work involved. So if we're delivering a website and we are working on a first epic called login, when you need to log in, there's so much that is involved both at the front end and at the back end, especially if the website is a sensitive website, especially if it's an e-commerce website. And maybe you're going to give me all your date of birth, your address, and when you sign up, you are going to probably use your credit card on this site. So it might look like a simple, oh, it's just a simple login, but there's so much going on back end in terms of authentication, in terms of verification, in terms of GDPR, in terms of, verification. There's so much going on. So at this high level, we have an epic called sign up or login. So when that epic now ends up on this backlog, we now have to break it down. So let's even call the epic access. So if the epic is access, we now have to break it down to sign up and login. And we also know that
what is an epic, Mary? Are you referring to a milestone?
An epic is a big story. It's a big piece of work. An epic is a big piece of work. So building a house could be an epic.
Okay.
An epic is just an epic is just work. Just look at it as work that we have to do.
It's a big memo, Mary. You got to break it out.
But we're getting there. We're getting there. So
this is
epic,
huge.
Yes, an epic is huge. And that is why it's a big story. Okay. So this big story is that we want access on this website. So we now break that down. Access could then mean we want our users to be able to sign up. We want our users to be able to log in. We want our users to be able to change their password, right? We are now breaking that epic into smaller chunks of work. Even when it comes to the login, we now break it down into smaller stories. And these are the things we are going to be doing. Creating epics and then breaking down those epics into smaller stories. Because in an agile environment, we tend to work with stories. Okay, we tend to work with stories. So an epic is just a big story. So once your epics and your stories end up on your product backlog, this is where, when you then start your sprint, you have your sprint planning meeting. During your sprint planning meeting, remember the product owner is the person responsible for determining what happens during this sprint. So the product owner tells you, I want this story done, I want that story done, I want this one done, and I want that one done. And then the team will now decide how much they can do. We will get into the technicalities of how that is done later. But first, just look at it this way. The product owner says, I want you to do these 10 items. And then the team says, sorry, we don't have capacity to do all these 10 for you, but we can do 7. So since we can do 7 of these, items of work on your list, you need to reprioritize. Remember, the product owner wanted us to do 10 stories, but now the team is saying, no, we can only do 7. So what will the product owner do? The product owner now has to change his priorities, because now he has to drop 3 stories. Now he has to drop 3 stories. So which 3 stories will he drop? That is the product owner's headache. He needs to now decide, what do I need to deliver this week? What's paramount for my customers this week? Okay, that story can wait. Okay, this story can wait. Okay, guys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This 7 will be good. And then those 7 stories then end up on the sprint backlog. And then the sprint starts. The 7 stories ends up on the sprint backlog and the sprint starts. They start working for 2 weeks, like I said before. Some people do 3-week sprint, but maximum Scrum guide says a sprint shouldn't be more than 4 weeks. But the common length is 2 weeks for most software development. Then the sprint starts. And then every morning, again, like we said before, they do the daily stand-up for 15 minutes. And as much as possible, the daily stand-up should be at the same time, every day, same place. That is what the guide says, that you should do your daily stand-up, same place, same time, every day. Consistency. Now, why is it 15 minutes? It is 15 minutes because we don't want people to come there and be rambling on. We don't want people to use it as a place where we are talking about new requirements. No. We want it to be a short meeting that ensures everybody is carried along, that ensures progress and transparency, is the order of the day. That also ensures that if there are impediments, we all know about it. And if somebody needs help, so it's usually, oh, this is what I did yesterday, this is what I'm doing today, and these are the impediments I have. And if you have no impediments, you have no impediments. But that's just a guide. Now, the interesting thing about the Scrum Guide is the fact that it's a guide. Because I remember Tunde saying yesterday that some things are compulsory, and I know where you were coming from. You're coming from the point of view that the Scrum Guide says this, or the Scrum Guide says that. Now, when you attend interviews, that's the last thing you want to say. Because the Scrum Guide is a guide. And that is why I keep saying context, context, context. Context matters. But when you have the knowledge and experience of how Agile is supposed to work, you are then able to analyze the context and know exactly how to approach that situation. Remember, if all you have is a hammer, every problem will be like a nail to you. Remember that. If all you have is a hammer, every problem will be like a nail. So as an Agilist, you are coming with different tools. And by the time we're done, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, you will have a lot of tools that you can use. So based on the context, you pull out a tool. Okay? So the approach is not textbook approach at all. When you are an Agilist, you are not going the textbook way at all. The Scrum Guide is a guide. Okay, so take for example, we call it a daily stand-up. So quite frankly, we should be standing up during this meeting. That is the whole point, so that it is quick. So that it is quick and everybody can get on with what, and then people don't get into this habit of thinking, oh, when we get there now, people will just be rumbling and rumbling, Everybody knows it's a short, focused meeting. Short, focused meeting, and we're done. Now, it's a stand-up meeting, yes. But if you have a lady in your team that is 8 months pregnant and she pulls up a chair, will you tell her not to sit down? Do you see what I mean? You wouldn't do that. Or someone has just had an operation and they have POP on. Are you going to tell them to stand? Of course, they'll pull a chair and sit down. I'm just giving very simple examples here, but you get the whole idea. So the Scrum Guide is a guide. So your daily Scrum meeting, focused, sharp meeting. And then at the end of your 2 weeks, you have your finished work and you have your stakeholders at that meeting. Now, as a Scrum Master, it is your job to make sure that these meetings, all these meetings are productive. All these meetings are happening when they should happen. All these meetings have been booked ahead of time. You have made sure that the rooms that you need, they are available. You don't want your stakeholders to come for your sprint review and then there's no room. You forgot to book a room. And then 1 hour before the sprint review meeting, you're running helter-skelter looking for a room and your stakeholders will be down in about 40 minutes. You don't want that to happen. So it is your role as a Scrum Master to make sure that all the ceremonies, everything, all the meetings are taken care of. Now, the sprint review meeting is, should I say, the Scrum Master makes sure that everything works fine, but it is the product owner that drives the sprint review meeting. Why is that? It sounds logical, right? But tell me why. Why is it the product owner, the one driving the sprint review meeting? Anybody?
It's a business decision.
It is business related.
Yeah. Yes, she's the one driving the business value. So,
exactly.
Yeah, she's in touch with it. So.
And it's the product owner that's been interacting with the stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
And the product owner is responsible for value delivery. Fantastic.
Yes.
So the product owner drives the sprint review meeting. However, the Scrum Master makes sure the meeting happens and makes sure it's effective. Do you get it? Make sure it's effective. Okay, so during the sprint review,
Mary,
yes,
sorry.
yes.
Now this sprint review meeting, it's meant to come after the product has been delivered. Am I right?
You are demoing it. You are going to demo the development team. Let us assume they've just developed a payment system on a website that belongs to some stakeholders. They are going to come and demo that payment system to the stakeholders. There will be a big television there or screen. They will now project the website and do a demo to
So
show
that means that this sprint review, the stakeholders do attend this meeting too.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. The stakeholders are there. That's why I said you don't want to keep them waiting. You want to make sure you've booked the room and everything.
So, Mary, can I ask?
Yes, please.
So, what if they didn't finish that product?
We'll get there. We'll get there.
Okay.
We're getting there.
Right.
So, during this meeting, let us go for the best case scenario first, and then we can work our way towards when things starts to, deviate. Let us assume they've developed this feature, they've tested it, they're happy. Now they want to demo to the stakeholders. And the room is all set. They project the website and they start to demo the feature to the stakeholders. So they go through all the stages, making sure that the stakeholders understand what is happening. The stakeholders are asking questions. Okay, why is that? Why is that? And then it could even be that, fair enough, they have delivered everything the stakeholder wants. But during the demo, the stakeholder now comes up with even more requirements. That's a possibility. So you come to a review meeting to demo, but you even go back with more requirements because somehow maybe a stakeholder had a light bulb moment, and something just popped up in their head and they think, oh, actually, I like what this feature is doing. It would be nice if it can do this too. That's one requirement you are walking away with now that you didn't have before. That requirement goes to the backlog for the product owner to now see where that requirement should fit. Are we going to be dealing with this requirement now, or maybe we're going to be dealing with this requirement two sprints down the line? But let's hold that for a moment. So the demo is done by the development team. So this is an opportunity for the development team to shine. Remember, like we said before, developers, they were always glued to their computer. They never used to talk to human beings, okay? But now we are pulling developers away to interact with stakeholders and users because we have come to see the benefit of the developers interacting with the users, interacting with stakeholders, because they are then able to ask questions that would ordinarily create go slow later, so to speak. They are able to ask questions from their perspective that will save us time later because they were there at the beginning. They understand the big picture. They are not lost when they are coding. And because they are there at the beginning, they also add their creativity to the big picture. They add their perspective to the big picture. They make the whole design and eventual product even better, much more creative, much more of a higher quality, because we have all put our heads together at the beginning and we understand the big picture. As opposed to, I'm a developer, I'm just sat at my screen and somebody has just given me a set of requirements. Somebody has just given me a set of requirements and I'm interpreting it to my coding understanding. But guess what? I could be operating under assumptions. I'm making assumptions because I was not at that meeting. And that is why waterfall, there was a lot of failures because they would just bring the requirement to the developer, yeah, develop it. That's what used to happen. Okay? So during this, someone's typing something. Okay. So during this review, it is so important. It's an opportunity for the development team to shine and more requirements can emerge. Okay. After the review, of course, try and make it interesting. If you have budget, bring in biscuits and drinks and what have you. After the review, everybody leaves. You take a break as much as possible. Make sure your meetings are not back to back, because you see, people get what we call meeting fatigue. So as a Scrum Master, when you are planning your meeting, make sure your meetings are well, positioned, so that there's no meeting fatigue and people are not rushing from one meeting to the other. Then you move on to your retrospective, maybe after the lunch break. And like I said before, the retrospective is so critical. Remember, this is an empirical environment. It is an empirical environment. We plan, we do, we check, we adapt. We start all over again. Plan, do, check, adapt. It's an empirical process. And that retrospective is what makes us better. That is what makes us better. And what kind of behaviors do you need during this retrospective? We've talked about a few before in the sessions we've had already. What kind of meeting should this retrospective be? What is the key thing that is necessary here in order for us to truly learn and get better? Because the whole point of the retrospective is we want our sprints to get better and better and better. So for every sprint and for every retrospective we do, we become better. Better in terms of the quality of our deliverables and better with the quality of our interactions. Exactly. So what kind of meeting, what are we, I'm looking for one word here, in fact, 2 words. What are we looking for here during the meeting?
Lessons learned and no blame culture.
No blame culture. No blame culture.
Free-spirited.
Yes, psychological safety. No blame culture. We are here to learn. No blame culture, because we win together, we fail together. Because when you start blaming, people will stop talking. This is why psychological safety is so important. We want radical candor. We want an environment that is safe to ask for help, an environment that is safe to learn, an environment that is safe for me to say, I don't know, I need somebody to teach me. Can somebody spend 30 minutes with me to help me? And then we continue to learn. So this is the cycle. Any questions at this point? You can see it's a simple framework. It is a very, very simple framework. Any questions?
Now, Mary, any thing brought up at the sprint review meeting? I mean, if the stakeholders want changes, those changes will come in the next sprint. They obviously cannot go back, or does it mean that they can go back and put that together, or they will wait for the next sprint?
It depends on what the requirement is. We've just done a demo and new requirements have emerged, rightfully so. This is an agile environment. Remember, we say changes. We are here. We have this framework so that we can, capture new requirements as they come along. Depending on the requirement, it may be something we need to do in this sprint that we're about to start next week. Because remember, I'm assuming this is a Friday now. We're doing this review on a Friday. And we've just had a few more requirements from our stakeholders. We are going to have a new sprint starting on Monday. It may well be that it is so important, it is of high value, that we add it to our coming sprint. So which means we're going to be talking about that requirement during our next sprint. Do you get it?
Okay.
We're going to be talking about it because it's going to end up on our backlog. Now, let us, Grace was saying something earlier on. What I've just given you is the best case scenario here, that, you know what, we delivered everything, went to plan, stakeholder is happy. And if the features that we have demoed is fine, it is the product owner that accepts the product. The product owner says, thank you very much, accepted. So that means it's an MVP that can be released. That means we have an MVP, okay, that can be released. Best case scenario. Now, let us assume that you came to the review and the job was not totally done. What happens? Now, I've worked with software developers and I've been in so many reviews where, let's say they had, we're not talking about velocity yet now in terms of story points because we're still at the very early stages here and I don't want to confuse you. So I'm just going to use number of stories just to make it easy on you to start with. Let us assume they committed to 25 stories when they started the sprint. They committed to 25 stories and they have come to the end of the sprint and they are now at the sprint review, but they were only able to work on 18 stories. They were only able to work on 18 stories. They demo what they have worked on so far. That's what I've experienced. They demo what they have worked on so far. And then they talk about the stories that they did not work on. So normally I'll show you the template I use. I have some best practice for, sprint review, sprint planning and all of that. I'm going to be sharing all of that with you. So the template is such that you talk about the stories you committed to, you talk about the ones you could deliver and the ones you could not deliver. So it's there on a high level. And you would normally have your velocity. You will also have, you obviously probably don't know what velocity means just yet, but you will eventually. You have your velocity, you talk about your velocity. Your velocity is really a measure of your capacity. And it is how you, it is the number that helps you to plan. Velocity is a planning tool. You'll come to understand it as we go along. So you demo that, you demo what you have done, and then you probably explain what happened with the other stories. It could be that you had an impediment and you had a dependency with another team. And you see, this is why in a development environment, as much as possible, we try to put what we call feature teams together as opposed to component teams. Because when you create component teams, it means this team is doing this thing, another team is doing that one, another team is doing that one, and we have to integrate. And because we have to integrate, we have dependencies. There are times when you can't escape that. But what a lot of organizations are doing now to minimize dependency, because dependency management can be a pain sometimes. And as a team, you only know what you guys can do, commit to, okay? And if I have a dependency with your team, I may not see your dependency with me as a priority. I will be looking at the work I have in my team as my priority. So your dependency will not be a priority for me. That tends to happen a lot, okay? So as much as possible, organizations where they can, avoid it, they avoid it. They avoid component teams. So they create what we call feature teams. So in other words, if we have an epic, for example, called Access, which involves sign up and login, they will try as much as possible to make sure it is one team that is working on it. I'm just using that as an example now. So that everything to do with the development of this epic is only this team that is doing it, as opposed to breaking an epic between teams, which happens because sometimes you can't escape that. But where you can create feature teams, it is better than component teams. And you may get a question, an interview question to say, component teams, feature teams, and they're sort of trying to see if you understand why a feature team is better than a component team. And the whole point here is when you have a feature team where a team is responsible for end-to-end delivery. That's what we call it. It's an end-to-end delivery. That means they are the one delivering everything. They don't have dependency with another team. Okay, so where you were not able to deliver some stories for whatever reasons, those are explained. So what happens to the stories that were not delivered? It goes back to the backlog. The stories that were not delivered goes back to the backlog. Now, there's no guarantee that because those stories were carryovers from the last sprint, they are automatically going to be done next sprint. It doesn't always work like that. It doesn't always work like that. It may well be that based on continuation of what we are doing, those stories that were not completed will be the first few stories that comes back to our sprint backlog. It may be, but it's not always the case. It will depend on what has come up as a result of the sprint review and the conversations we were having with the stakeholders. And if our goal for our next sprint is something else that does not include those stories, so be it. Because remember, the product owner is the one driving it. I hope that makes sense. Any questions? You must have questions now.
It does. It makes sense because I have exactly that experience.
Okay.
Where, yeah, it happens. Then sometimes it's put down the line because you explain to the stakeholder that, you know, right now we won't put that in, and it's something that can be adjusted in sprint 10 or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about getting ready a few sprints ahead because, I mean, right now I'm just giving you the simplest scenario because we're just starting to understand the framework. I don't want to complicate it too much for you. Let's take it gradually. So I want to be sure that we understand what we can all see right here, right now. The cycle. Here we have team members. We have the Scrum team, which is made up of the product owner, the development team, and the Scrum master. We have what we call artifacts. Artifacts, your product backlog is an artifact. Your sprint backlog is an artifact. Okay? And then we have the ceremonies. Your sprint planning is a ceremony. Your daily stand-up is a ceremony. Your sprint review is a ceremony. Okay? Now, there's something that is missing here, and it's called the backlog refinement. I've not talked about that yet. I wanted to give you the simplest scenario first. There's what we call backlog refinement. It is not a ceremony, but it's a meeting that happens during your sprint cycle. Now, imagine you're having, now I was asking if anybody had a question. Any question?
Yes, Mary. Yeah, it's Donald there.
Donald, go ahead, please.
You mentioned quite a lot of terminologies here. Actually, they're quite very interesting. Future and component.
Feature, FEA.
Oh, it's FEA. Thank
you.
Feature,
yeah, a feature, like a feature on your digital product.
And component teams and what they do and all that.
Yeah.
One of the areas I wanted clarification probably is if there are any real differences between retrospective product and sprint meetings. Okay, because you did mention retrospective meeting and then product meeting and then sprint meeting and things like that.
Sprint planning meeting. The sprint planning meeting is where you plan for your sprint. Your retrospective meeting is where you do your lessons learned.
I mean, actually, they're review meetings, things like that, yeah.
No, I want you to get this right. You see, sometimes people mix it up, the review and the... let me tell you what happens in reality. You see this sprint review, this is where you demo.
Right.
During the sprint review, that is where you demo what you have done, your MVP. You demo your MVP. So if it were a digital product, you just run through, you do a demo of the digital product. It could be an app, it could be a website. You show the stakeholders, this is what you are deliver. You show them the flow. This screen, you show them the next screen and all the screens that, is part of your deliverables. You demo it to them. That's what happens during the sprint review.
And do you hold product review meetings as well?
That is your product right there. That is your product review meeting. It goes by so many names, so don't get confused. The most important thing is that whatever your product is, you're doing a demo during the sprint review. Do you get it?
Yeah.
Okay. So now that demo is a product. That's what you are demoing is a product. It's a digital product for the most part.
All right. Okay. Then the retrospective is just actually looking back at lessons learned and obviously make sure you don't blame anyone and that sort of thing. Yeah. No blame.
Absolutely. So we do that at the end of every sprint so that we get better.
That's for the Scrum team, yeah?
That is for the Scrum team. That's for the development team. It's for the development team. The product owner is usually not in this meeting. It is for the development team. The retrospective is for the development team. Usually, the Scrum Master will be there because the Scrum Master is a facilitator. Yeah. Okay. So,
just a last question.
Yes.
Basically, there is cost involved in all of this. Is it assuming that obviously there has been a cost estimate of all of this, or somebody else has to do that? Obviously, you got this team, they're all working together and all that. So what would that have to cost in terms of obviously either manpower, obviously cash to the organization or the product owner? Well, if it's the product
This is taken care of at a higher level. So you're not dealing so much with cost.
You're not dealing with that. Okay.
You're not dealing but of course your time is cost. You as a developer, you are there at a cost. The product owner is there at a cost. Everybody is there at a cost. And all that has been factored into the budget for that product. So you have your fixed cost, obviously, and you have your recurring or whatever cap cost or capex or whatever you want to call it, things like that. Yes. So all that is taken care of. We're not going to give ourselves any headache with budget within the development team. Okay. Now, depending on the nature of maybe the project, the ones I've been involved in, for example, we had somebody who was at the departmental level. She was not a member of any particular Scrum team. She was just the personnel within the department who took care of the budget and the allocation. So during the quarterly business review, we begin to talk about budget. Every quarter, we're talking about budget. And I'm going to talk about QBR towards in about 3 months' time. We should be talking about QBR. Every quarter, and as a Scrum Master, you will be heavily involved in the facilitation of the QBR. You will be involved, except you are a very small team focus.
What is the meaning of the acronym, please?
Quarterly business review. Quarterly business review. So if you are a Scrum Master because I'm an Agile coach, I'm always involved. So as a Scrum Master, you may not be involved, but it's good to know, because they may start to involve you if you're, take for example, if you're responsible for 2-3 teams, they may start to involve you in their QBR process. So it's good to know what QBR is. It's good to know how to facilitate it for efficiency and all of that. So for me as an Agile coach, I actually help organizations make their QBR process much more efficient. If I get there and I see that, it's not efficient enough and things like that, I will help them review it and help them, alter things here and there. Okay, so any more questions before I talk about backlog refinement?
Can I ask another question?
Please, go ahead.
Sorry. So in this change process,
yes,
where one of the stakeholders would say, oh, can I have this other thing added to it? So if we have a budget, because everything is money related as well, and if that thing is not within the budget for that, it's supposed to be a feature that will cost a little bit more than planned for a specific sprint. So how do you handle that?
Well, you've already answered your question, as a matter of fact. You said if it's something that is not within this budget. Now, there is what we call scope creep, right? In waterfall environment, we baseline our plan. We baseline it. We say it's going to be, and this is what we're going to work on. We lock the scope, and then we alter the budget and the time. That's what we do in waterfall. In Agile, it is the other way around. Okay. In Agile, we've talked about budgets. Okay, we've talked about budgets. We have 500,000 for this project. Okay, to play around with, and we are ready to be dynamic in our decision. We want to be dynamic in our decision. So we can play around with our scope. So take, for example, the initial requirement was, give me a cup, give me a saucer, give me a kettle. And then now the stakeholder is coming and say, oh, I want a pot as well. If we need all of that in order to achieve the value, so be it. Because what we do in the Agile environment is play around with scope. But I'm now talking based on the fact that we have enough budget to play around with. Where a stakeholder is coming up with something that is totally out of, the scope and budget of this particular project, then that becomes a different story, which is very unlikely, because it's very unlikely that the budget for the change will be so big that we need to go and review the budget. It's very unlikely, and that is why you have that high level roadmap as much as possible. And you've already made provision at that high level in terms of budgetary provisions. And you have the elasticity to play with there and moving your scope around. There are times when you can bring in a new scope and de-scope something else in an agile environment. So that could also be how you push things around. Okay, you want this now, that means we're going to deprioritize this. That can also happen. Or you're not going to have this for now. Now, even in an agile environment, we talk about the Moscow prioritization technique. Must have, should have, could have, won't have for now. So as a stakeholder changing your requirements, you have to remember that we have to prioritize and that we also have a budget to work with. So that is already in the scope of, in terms of their boundaries. There are boundaries, there are guardrails, we call them guardrails. So we have that. But of course, if you told me to build a car for you, you can't come now and tell me to build an aeroplane for you and think I'll have the budget for it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But
it does.
If you say, if the window was going to be a manual window before, but now you're saying you want an electric window.
You want automatic. Exactly.
That is still sort of like, but you're not going to come now and say, give me an aeroplane. That's what I'm saying. Most of the time you can play around with your scope in an agile environment. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay, any more questions?
One quick question,
yes.
Please. If we're having both meetings, sprint review and the retrospective on the same day, is there a maximum time limit to the meetings?
Yes, there are time limits to the meeting. There are actually standards. Normally your sprint review is like, I think 2 hours and your retrospective is 1.5 hours. But your retro can be 1 hour. There's no, like I said, those timings are just guides.
Okay.
It could be that for your team, your retro is 1 hour and is enough. It could be that for your sprint review, 1 hour is enough. I mean, we did, I think we did 1 hour, 30 minutes for our sprint review and 1 hour for our retro. That was what we did. Okay. Well, in my last job, anyway, that was what we had. We had 1 hour for retro and 1 hour, 30 minutes for review. So those things, like I said, don't go to interviews and give rigid textbook answers. Instead, say it's a guide, but of course, context matters. So take, for example, your sprint review meeting, the guide says 2 hours. If your meeting is done at 1 hour, 30 minutes, are you still going to sit down there? Of course not. Exactly.
My concern is even the upper end, like longer than 2 hours, 3 hours, going
well,
into 3
as much as possible.
Yes.
So this is where the guide comes in. So 2 hours max. You don't want it to be too long. You want people to be attending every time you invite them. And this is where running effective meetings comes in. That is why I say every time we meet with intent. And I have like a best practice template for all these things to ensure that, and that's why you have the Scrum Master. You want to make sure that the meeting is effective and we're keeping to time. Remember, the sprint review is, the product owner is running the show, but the Scrum Master is also there to help facilitate and make sure that our meetings are effective. Timekeeping is part of what you have to do when you're running all these meetings. You don't want one person to take 30 minutes and then some other people don't even have the time to talk. So if you have stakeholders, you want to make sure that all the stakeholders have their say, for example. So if somebody says something, you can then ask questions. What do you think, Peter? What's your, anything to add? Make sure people have the opportunity to talk and that the meeting, runs smoothly. And that is why we're going to do some, we're going to have a session about, running effective meetings. Very, very important.
Excuse me, Mary.
Yeah.
Mary,
thank
for
you.
the daily Scrum, compulsorily must be 15 minutes. The daily Scrum meeting.
That is a guide. We don't want it to be longer than 15 minutes. It can be 10 minutes. We don't want it to be longer than 15 minutes because you see, you want it to be a short and focused meeting. Short and focused meeting so that people are always attending. You understand? Short, focused, everybody carried along. People know who's doing what. If I need help, I can get it. If there's an impediment, I can get it. Do you understand? We know who's removing the impediment. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
Any other question?
You're not spoken about the burn down or and /up charts. What does that mean?
I don't want to bother you too much about that. That's just a metric. This is a metric of how well we are doing. Burn down chart and burn up chart. Just know that is a metric for now. You will actually use it. You will see how it works. So that is an artifact too. Your burn down chart is an active artifact. Your burn up chart is an artifact. Okay. So let's talk about the backlog. Okay.
The meetings. Sorry. I just want to.
No, that's okay.
Is somebody expected or required to take minutes at some of these minutes or to put down what cost? I'm looking at the manifesto that says working software over comprehensive documentation.
Yes, we usually don't do minutes like that. In my case, no, all the times that I've worked, nobody is taking any minutes, because at the end of the day, the most important thing there is the requirements. If new requirements have been generated, if new requirements have been communicated, then the Scrum Master and the product owner make sure that is captured. So as a Scrum Master, you are there, you are probably helping the product owner to write down any new requirements that may have come up. But in terms of minutes in the traditional sense, no. But if your organization requires it, then fine. I would imagine that maybe organizations like government settings might need that. I don't know. Grace, you have worked with government in an agile environment, right?
No, I worked with a private company.
Okay, it was private.
We took notes.
Okay.
So I could take the notes, or I could nominate a developer to take the notes.
Okay.
And then, because if there's a dependency between them or something or the other, then they'll both know. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm amongst the So it's not, but it's not minutes so much in the traditional sense. Is what I'm trying to say, where you are always taking minutes and sending to everybody. I guess if there are certain issues raised and there needs to be a follow-up. So what I'm trying to say is, don't document for the sake of documentation. Do you see what I mean? If there's need to take notes and send email to somebody, fine. If there's no need, fine. Okay. It's a straightforward review. Everybody is happy. You know, that's it. You would normally have already your template. So I really don't see the need for extra minutes, and that template should capture everything already. So I guess we can call that the documentation, really. You see what I mean? The template I'm going to share with you, where you have all the stuff, and then if you then have new requirements, it's probably going on that template. If there are impediments that need to be resolved, it's going on that template. And then if you need to communicate that, of course, you communicate it via email. Because you see, you're trying to limit the burden on people in terms of even the emails we are reading. Because today you go into your office in the morning, you have like 400 emails waiting for you. Right or wrong? So I try to discourage any unnecessary email to be sent if it is not necessary. And another thing that happens these days is that we have a repository. So most of the time, you have a shared space where all these things are kept. So the stakeholders usually would have access to that shared space. For example, we had a space on Confluence and on Confluence, and we also had a space on SharePoint. So at the end of every review, it is there. You can see the template. You can see what happened during that review. So there's no need to now send email to everybody, if that makes any sense. Yeah? Are we together?
We are together, we are.
Okay, any questions again, still, before I move on?
Well, probably my last question, still relating to this budget. I mean, as I say, just trying to get it clear, because
yeah, that's okay.
I don't know, because generally project management, I look at a scope, I look at the cost, I look at the time. Obviously, you got to deliver the product, and that sort of thing. And if, like you mentioned, if there is any creep, either a scope creep, then probably something you may have to discuss. In this particular respect, I mean, Scrum, and like the example you gave, say you had 25 stories, and by that first sprint, you were supposed to do all of them, but you can only do 18. Or but by the next meeting, probably the product owner or either the customer says, well, listen, I want this extra feature and that and that and that in this product. So that may mean an increased cost. So what I want to know in essence is, do you have a kind of elastic budget? Like you mentioned, quarterly budget review. Do you have a range of 500,000 to 650,000 that could take care of any of those things or those scripts, or that is something to be taken care of?
That is taken care of at a higher level, like I said. And you have a backlog system, and you are a stable team for product development. So what I will say at this one is, don't worry yourself with who is taking care of the budget, where the budget is coming from. Try and understand the framework first. Don't worry yourself about that, because that is taken care of outside of the team. Okay? That is, yes, because you have the product owner and you have stakeholders, you have executives who are responsible for this product. So they have their budget, they are managing the budget, so you don't worry about that. Okay? Because we are moving away from project to product now. Yes. So that is taken care of in a separate, on a higher level. Not so much what you need to worry about in the team. If anything, what you are worried about in the team is the scope management. Okay, are we doing this feature or are we doing that feature? Do we prioritize this feature? In other words, the product owner having a conversation with the stakeholders to say, okay, we have a backlog, but we can't do all of them. Remember 80-20 rule? The Pareto principle? Each time we are going to deliver, each time we're going to deliver what is most important to you. Do you get it? What is the most important thing to you is what we're going to deliver. What adds the most value to you as a business? Exactly. So that's how we work. So let's quickly talk about backlog refinement, and then we can call it an evening. Now, we are talking about a 2-week sprint. We started our sprint planning on a Monday, and 2 Fridays later, we're going to end it. So which means if we don't have a backlog refinement, we are not going to look at that backlog again until the next sprint planning. Does that make sense to start with? We started a sprint on a Monday. 2 Mondays before we start another sprint. So which means in 2 weeks' time, we will be looking at that backlog again to decide what we want to do for another 2 weeks. Now, if in between these 2 weeks, somewhere in the middle here, we do not even attempt to look at the backlog again, then it means we're not going to see that backlog again for another 2 weeks. Now, what is the whole point of this backlog refinement? The whole idea of looking at the backlog at least once before the sprint ends is to see if new requirements have come in. Now, remember, a requirement may have come in during the sprint review. It may not. Requirement may come in during your sprint review because the stakeholders have new ideas. And it may just be a sprint review where you demoed everything, everybody was happy, the product owner accepted the MVP, and that was it. But 2 days later, something new entered the backlog, not during the sprint review, after the sprint review, after your retrospective. Okay? After you've started your sprint. Okay? You've done your sprint review, you've done your retrospective, you've started your sprint, you've started another sprint, and you are 1 week into that sprint. 1 week into your sprint, stakeholders are talking with customers, things are happening, and new requirements have come into the backlog. Now, if you do not allocate time during that 2-week period where you are in sprint to say, okay, guys, backlog refinement time. So when we say we are going for a backlog refinement meeting, it is to see that the backlog, to see if something new has come in and to put the backlog in order. Now, when I say in order, that means it's a big word. It means a whole lot of things. It means we are prioritizing the backlog. It means we are sizing our stories. It means we are breaking down big epics into small stories. Because remember, we have epics in our backlog. And those epics are big stories. And big stories cannot go into our sprint backlog. We have to break them down into small stories. And when we break them down into small stories, we have to estimate them. And not only that, we have to map them. So when we map stories, we are trying to put stories together that can give us a functionality. So there's story mapping, there's story slicing, there's story sizing, there's epic breaking down into features and stories, there's definition of ready, there's definition of done. So as you can see, I gave you just the simple scenario of how the framework works. But when we now start drilling down into what happens during a sprint planning, there's more happening there. When we drill down into what happens during a backlog refinement, there's so much happening. What's our definition of ready? What is our definition of done? Because the testers needs to know how to test. They need to know the acceptance criteria of these stories. What are the acceptance criteria of these stories? They need to know. Definition of ready. If a story is not ready, we will not pull it into our sprint backlog.
I've lost you, Mary.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
All right, back on. Yeah, I can hear you.
When did you lose me?
It was right at the point of breaking down epics into stories.
Okay. So during the backlog refinement, we're breaking down epics into stories. We are mapping the stories. We're slicing the stories. We call it story slicing. We're slicing the stories. We are looking at the invest criteria to make sure that the story is ready. Because if a story is not ready and you pull the story into your sprint backlog, you may get stuck halfway through your sprint. You may get stuck. You get stuck because you do not fully understand the story. You have dependencies that you do not understand. There is something about GDPR that you do not quite understand. That story was not ready. And sometimes when you have that problem, maybe the story was too big. So you need to cut that story, break it down into smaller story so that it becomes much more obvious what needs to be done with these stories and how long it will take to deliver these stories. So that is the whole point. So that when you start your next sprint, the backlog is not unfamiliar to you. When you start your next sprint, after your review and your retrospective, the backlog is not unfamiliar to you. You worked on it just 1 week ago, just for argument's sake. You had a backlog refinement session. So just 1 week ago, during your sprint, in the middle of your sprint, you came together as a team and looked at your backlog, at your product backlog to make sure it is in order and to make sure that the stories you are going to be working on during your next sprint are ready. They've been broken down, they've been prioritized, they've been sized, they've been sliced, and they are ready. They meet the definition of ready. That's what we call definition of ready. The stories at the top of your product backlog that is likely going to go into your sprint backlog meet the definition of ready. This is where I'm going to stop today. Any questions? Please, everybody, unmute yourself if you have a question. I hope it is clear.
Yeah, it is clear for me.
Grace is clear for you. Tunde, how is it for you? Sylvia, how is it for you? Ask questions, please, if it's not clear. Ask questions. And you can always watch the video again. Definition of ready is so key. If a story does not meet the definition of ready, we don't pull it into the sprint backlog.
Yeah, Mary, this is Shola.
Yes.
Yes. I'm just thinking in the industry, who normally hires the Scrum Master? Is it the product owner or how does
who does what?
Who normally hires a Scrum Master?
Oh, okay. A Scrum Master is usually hired at the beginning. So take, for example, they are putting an Agile team together. The product owner usually comes from the business. The product owner would normally come from the business. So the product owner and the stakeholders are usually the ones that hire the Scrum Master. The product owner and some stakeholder members. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other question?
Can you just do a quick summary of the backlog refinement? I think I was lost in the process of your earlier explanation.
Okay. A backlog refinement is an opportunity for us to tidy it up before our next sprint.
That's to tidy the product backlog.
The product backlog. It is an opportunity for us to work on it and tidy it up. And by tidying it up, we mean, and also so that when we start our sprint, our next sprint, it is not, we are not unfamiliar with the new items that has been added, because the product backlog is a dynamic artifact. Things come in constantly, because remember, we're constantly talking to the customers, we're constantly capturing their new requirements. So as much as possible, we don't want to leave our understanding of the new items of work that has come into the product backlog till the last minute when we are starting a new sprint. So as much as possible, during this our 2-week sprint, let us say after 1 week, so we started a sprint on Monday. By Friday, we are looking at the product backlog again, or on Monday, we're looking at the product backlog. Not for the benefit of our current sprint. No, we are already working on a particular, on some stories already for this sprint. Not for the benefit of this current sprint. For the benefit of our next sprint, we are already looking at the backlog. Why? What if I'm going to be working on a story next week, and I am in the process of doing the backlog refinement, I realize I have a dependency with compliance. What will that help me to do? It will help me to start maybe very quickly, send an email to compliance to say, hey guys, I'm going to be working on a story. I need you to give me that GDPR certificate or whatever, make sure it is ready. Do you see? That means I have had the opportunity to quickly work on my dependency, because I know compliance will not answer me for another 1 week. So because I know it will take almost 1 week for compliance to give me what I want regarding GDPR, I have already immediately after the backlog refinement, somebody in the team has sent a message to compliance to say, hey guys, we are going to be working on this story at our next sprint. We need
this has to come from the Scrum Master or the product owner.
No. This is coming from the development team now. The development team is getting familiar with the product backlog, and the product owner too is there. Everybody is there. The product owner is there. The Scrum Master is there. We are working on the product backlog. Okay, we are tidying it up. We are trying to understand the new stories that have come in, as well as the other stories that are there that we have not fully understood yet. Do you get it?
Yes, sir.
There are stories in this backlog. Just stories at work. It's work. It's task. Yeah. We will come to the structure of the story later. We are still at a high level here. So we are all together trying to understand all the things in this product backlog. Bearing in mind, in fact, let me show you this other diagram so that you see. You see this diagram here? Can you still see my screen? Yeah. Can you see that the squares at the top are small? Can you see that?
Yeah.
The squares at the top are small. As you move down the product backlog, the squares are bigger. Mm-hmm. So you have epics at the bottom and you have stories at the top. So what you have at the top here, what this picture is signifying is that we have broken down this epic into small stories. These stories are small enough for us to understand how long or what to do with it when we take it into our sprint backlog. Can you see that?
Yeah.
So these are the stories that come into our sprint backlog. The small stories that are at the top of the product backlog, because those stories are the ones that they are at the top because the product owner wants us to work on them next. Those are the stories we're going to be pulling into the sprint backlog. They've been broken down. We understand them. We understand the dependencies that they have. We understand everything about the story. We have used the invest criteria to break it down. And it is small enough for us to complete in this sprint. It is small enough for us to complete in this sprint. And we can size it. And because we can size it, we then know how much we can take, because different stories will have different sizes. A story could be 1. Another story could be 2 in terms of relative sizing. We will come to that. Don't let it bother you just yet. Just know that we need to size stories. And we are sizing stories so that we know the effort that is required for that story. And based on the effort that is required for that story, we are able to say we can only do 30 stories or we can only do 10. So if your velocity is 20, you are then using your velocity to take the stories you can do. So if our velocity is 30, for example, and after taking 10 stories, we are still at 22. That means the stories we took were like 2 points. Do you get it? Mm-hmm. If the size of our stories was like 2 points, it means we have taken 10 stories. So what am I saying? We have taken 10 stories. Okay, we've taken 10 stories, and because they are 2 points, we have taken about 22 points. And our velocity is 30. That means we still have 8 points available because our velocity is 30. I will come to the technicalities later. But you see, we are using this velocity to plan. So our velocity is 30. So far, we have taken 10 stories into our backlog, but we still have 8 points. So we are telling the product owner, okay, we still have 8 points. Which other story do you want to add? And then the product owner now gives us a story that is 2. And then gives us another story that is 2. And then another story that is 2. That is already 6 points. So now we have 2 points left. If at this point, the product owner then tries to give us a story that is 5, we say no. We don't take it. If the product owner has a story that is 1, fine. But if the product owner has a story that is 3, fair enough, maybe we can take it because it will only take us 1 point above our velocity, which is 30. But if the product owner is now trying to give us a story that will take us to like 35, 37, we say no. Why? Because we want to be predictable. As a team, we want to be predictable so that every sprint we are able to deliver just about what we commit to. So every sprint, if we are using 30 as our velocity, so maybe this sprint we deliver 29, maybe the other sprint we deliver 28. Not that we committed to 30 and then we deliver 10. So we are looking for predictability, because when we have predictability, we are able to plan better. Let me stop here. Any questions? Because we're really going to get into the technicalities of relative sizing, story points, velocity, user story slicing, mapping. We're going to get into the technicalities of all that. But it's very important to me that you understand this high level first before we start getting into the technicalities. And it's also very important to me that you ask questions now. And of course, you can watch the video again, but that you ask questions if you have any gray areas at all. Deji, are you okay? Shola, Henry?
Yeah.
Deji, you are fine with this explanation?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Ndidi, are you okay? Shola,
yes,
what about you?
thanks.
Okay, Shola, what about you?
Yes, I'm fine. Yeah, so far so good. Yeah.
So far so good. Okay, and you please watch the video again if you have to. Dele, how about you?
Good. It's a lot to take in.
It is.
Yes.
It is. Franca.
Hi, Mary.
Hi. How's it for you?
It's
Have any question?
No, I work in a Scrum environment at the point.
Okay.
Yeah, everything sounds very familiar.
Very familiar. Very good. I'm glad to hear that. Grace, okay?
Oh, yes. Yes, it's fine. I did say at the beginning.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So as Dele, I totally understand it's a lot, and that is why I'm taking my time, and that is also why it is recorded. But by the time, because we're going to be repeating it and repeating it and repeating it, we're going to be talking about it every day. It will soon become second nature to you. So don't worry at all. Do not worry at all. We are also going to simulate a project. Felicia, how is it for you as well?
Very well. It's okay. I'm following.
You're following. Good. So we're going to simulate a project that will really drive the understanding home. Okay. It's a simple framework. It's just that at the beginning, it looks like, what's all this, story slicing, sprint planning and everything, but you will get it. Yeah, you will get it in the end. You will get it. You will. Okay, so this is all there is about this. What's in front of me is what your Scrum framework is. That is it. Simple, but it can get deeper. Okay, so yeah, we'll look at that. So let me stop recording at this point, and let me leave you to have the rest of your evening.